Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Texas Developmental Screening and Surveillance Echo, brought to you by UT San Antonio in collaboration with the Texas Department of State Health Services. My name is Maria Gutierrez, and I will be facilitating today's session. A few housekeeping reminders before we do officially begin. To help with attendance, please enter your full name, affiliation, and email into the chat. Thank you so much to everyone that got that started. As a reminder, these sessions are being recorded for later distribution. We do ask that you please stay muted unless you are speaking, though we do encourage using the chat and/or raise your hand feature to pose questions or share perspectives during today's Q&A portion of the didactics and also discussion. If you are having any sort of connection issues, please privately chat Karen or UT Echo IT for any assistance. To ensure privacy, no personal health information is allowed at any point during the session. This does include names, addresses, birth dates, and any other identifiable information. Let us always make every effort to avoid bias and stigmatizing terms so that we can continue to have a space that is respectful and safe to learn for everyone. With that, we'll go ahead and move on to some team introductions. I do see Dr. Jennifer Cox first.
Welcome, everybody. So glad you are here. I am Jennifer Cox. I work with My Health, My Resources in Tarrant County, where I'm heavily involved in our Help Me Grow North Texas work. So glad you're here.
Thanks so much, Dr. Cox. I also see Faith Rivera.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Faith Rivera, and I'm the CEO and Principal Consultant of Alice Avitas Consulting. I'm really excited that you all are here for this important topic today.
Thank you so much, Faith. And we also have Dr. Dorothy Mandel.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you guys are here. I'm Dorothy Mandel. I'm an associate professor at UT Health School of Public Health, and my background is in developmental psychology. So I'm really happy to have you guys here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mandel. And our didactic presenter for today, Karen Abbott.
Hi, it's good to see everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Karen Abbott, and I am a board certified behavior analyst, a BCBA, who works at the UNT Kristen Farmer Autism Center here in Denton. And at this point, I work just with preschoolers, so very young children. And I'm excited to kind of give you guys some information about that today.
Thank you so much, Karen, for presenting today. I know this is a highly anticipated presentation for today and topic. With that, we'll go ahead and hand that over right back to you. You may take it away.
Okay, sounds good. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I can find the share screen. There you are. Is this one, I believe? Okay. Okay, and you guys can see that. So I entitled today's presentation, I'm using supportive ABA strategies to foster success. I know that there's a lot of confusion about ABA. It kind of doesn't really sound like what it is. I think people don't quite know what it is. I didn't know what it was when I first started out with a child with autism. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. First, disclosures: the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of my own and do not reflect the official views or policy of UT Health San Antonio. I have no financial conflicts of interest to disclose concerning this presentation. UT Health San Antonio Echo recognizes that language is constantly evolving, and while we make every effort to avoid bias and stigmatizing terms, we acknowledge that unintentional lapses may occur in our presentations. We value your feedback and encourage you to share any concerns related to language, images, or concepts that may be offensive or stigmatizing. Your input will help us refine and improve our presentations, ensuring they remain inclusive and respectful to participants. Okay, so this is me. That's me on the right there. My daughter is in the middle. My husband's on the left. I'm a married mom of three. I have three children. My middle child's name is Julian. He just turned 18 last week. So we've kind of entered into the whole, trying to get him the type of, support that we need for him, like a guardianship and medical power attorney and all that. He was diagnosed when he was 2 years old. I am a board certified behavior analyst and also a certified teacher. I did teach autism and language disorders class for 5 years in the public schools here in Texas, for 3 years in Keller ISD, and for 2 years in Birdville. And I worked for 4 different ABA companies. This is the fourth. I've been in the field for about 10 years. I currently work at UNT Kristen Farmer Autism Center, of course, with preschoolers. And my degrees are in ESL and then special education, applied behavior analysis. And I'm also working on an MBA in strategic management, which sounds like a strange combination, but I do have a purpose for it. It has to do with my son being older and trying to figure out what we're going to do, as he gets older and develops skills. So moving right in to the presentation, I wanted to start with kind of developmental differences in autism. So what is autism? What does it look like? It's a kind of a buzzword, gets thrown around a lot. People have a tendency, now you see people talking about I am autistic, kind of self-identifying as autism, as autistic. Some people are they're just on the internet kind of deciding that they are, and there's a huge increase in diagnoses even amongst adults. So what does autism look like in early development? And that's kind of where we're at. The diagnostic criteria from the DSM-5 are, there's 4 of them. One, they have to have a significant social communication and interaction deficit. A lot of times that looks like a lack of eye contact, a fixation on non-humans. So that's why I have a picture of a fan there. I have a lot of stories of babies just staring at fans instead of looking into eyes. Language delay. So a lot of times they're delayed. And to add on to that, sometimes they will begin to grow language, and then around the age of 2, they'll start losing it, which is what happened to my son. So he was gaining language and he had a lot of words, and then just kind of stopped. And I was trying really hard to get him to continue to talk, and he just wouldn't do it. And it was difficult. So then a lot of times they have difficulty with joint attention. So that means you looking at them, making eye contact, and then also looking at other objects. So what we call a triadic gaze would be me looking at a person and then me looking at the thing that's between us. So we're kind of jointly attending to a thing. Also echolalia. So if they do develop language, sometimes kiddos just never put it together and are not able to use any type of verbal speech. Sometimes they do, but they memorize phrases. So they wind up being what we call Gestalt learners. I can never say that word, Gestalt learners, where they learn language in chunks and kind of memorize it and will speak to you in like a whole chunk instead of saying, I'm opening the door, they'll say something like, the door is open, and it's from like a video that they learned on YouTube, so they'll speak in words and phrases that they heard in a song, instead of using words like we typically do. The second one is restricted repetitive behavior. So you'll see like hand flapping, rocking, lining up toys, non-functional play, and intense sensory difficulty. So sometimes it'll look like, they walk into a room and they have such sensitive hearing that they have to immediately cover their ears. Because it's just so loud and it hurts their ears. It's a physical pain for them. One time I was walking with one of my children into like a huge, we had the first ABA place that I worked at, they rented space in this gigantic like mega church. And we were walking right in the middle of it, from the front door all the way to the back. So it was kind of in the middle of this huge building. And there was a train probably a quarter of a mile away. I mean, I didn't know the train was there. And he covered his ears and started going, the train, the train. And then as we walked by the windows, I realized there was a train going. And I was like, wow, he really can hear that, So just very, very like sensitive hearing. Sometimes they'll have sensitive, sounds, sound sensitive. Sometimes they're visual sensitive. Sometimes they don't like touch. And sometimes they're seeking, like sensory seeking, where they want more than you would typically give a child. And sometimes they're sensory aversive. And then number 3, it has to be present in early childhood. And number 4, the symptoms have to cause a significant impairment. And the average age of diagnosis is 4 to 5. My son was just under 3 when we finally got his actual diagnosis. A lot of times they're a little bit older, and sometimes when they have lots of good skills, they're much older than that. So sometimes kids are 13 before they're like, maybe I do have autism, and they start looking into potentially whether they do. There's in addition to the diagnosis of autism, there are also 3 levels involved of autism. The levels are based on the amount of support an individual could need at any given point in their development. Most individuals do not lose their diagnosis across their lifetime, but they can move up and down the levels as they gain or lose skills. Usually you would, ideally we would say move up. We want them to move up. So like I've seen kids given a level 3 diagnosis where they are requiring very substantial support when they're 2 or 3, and with early intervention are able to move themselves up to a level 1 where they're actually using language. So the levels can change across the lifetime. More often than not, almost never do kids actually lose the diagnosis. It can happen if they're diagnosed very young, they build enough skills, and then they just don't show those symptoms anymore. They can lose the diagnosis, but that's very, very atypical. I put this in here just so that you've probably heard of high functioning versus low functioning autism. It's an older method used to describe autism, and it's not preferred anymore because it's when you say somebody who's high functioning, you just think, oh, there's not really too much of a problem there. And it tends to undermine and undercut the problems that they do have. So somebody who has like lots and lots of language, who would be level 1, um, can still have huge meltdowns. I don't know if you've ever watched any of those shows that you can find on Netflix. But they may have like significant issues with sensory difficulties, or become overwhelmed and overstimulated in a crowded bus or something like that, and they wind up having to get off the bus and immediately go home or find a place to go to just calm down and self-regulate. It's the reason that, yeah, so a lot of times, even though they're considered high functioning, if you say high functioning, people won't recognize that that they have a significant disability that does make their life more difficult, and they do need some support. So they prefer, it's preferred that we use the levels rather than the high or low functioning to describe the level of need that they have. What causes autism? Simply put, we don't always know. Sometimes there are genetic factors. It's multifactorial, and these are links in here. So hopefully, when you can get the, grab hold of this, you can click on the links. These are things you can also Google. But there are studies ongoing. There are genetic factors, like Fragile X frequently causes autism. Of course, autism is a behavioral diagnosis, so it's not something you can get a blood test to receive. It's entirely based on how you behave. Sometimes there are family histories. So twin studies show that children with autism, like if there are 2 identical twins born and one of them has autism, I think it's something like a 90% chance that the other one will too. So there's a very high genetic factor, but also a certain level of environmental factors as well, obviously. Some specific links that are actually proven to some correlative level are advanced parental age from both mother and father, as well as maternal health during pregnancy and prenatal exposure to toxins. But none of those things guarantee a diagnosis of autism. And I did want to go ahead and plug this because it is such a big popular topic, that there is significant evidence that there is no correlational link between vaccines and autism. That has come up many times. There was one study done in like the late 90s, early 2000s that was debunked. And unfortunately, people still harp on that. And I think it's because it's just an easy target. They think, well, there's children, they get vaccines when they're little. And then all of a sudden, all these kids are getting autism, so surely it's the vaccines. It's a cognitive leap that we don't need to make because it's already kind of been disproven. That doesn't mean that we can't continue to look, but I think really my point here is that we don't really know. We can guess and we can do our best, but we definitely don't want to blame parents. I think that's part of the problem, is that parents tend to feel blamed when you do that, when there's no evidence. Why and when does autism require intervention? So I'm sure you've probably heard of plenty of people who are like, I'm autistic. You can just, I don't need, you don't need to push these children through these very harsh stages and all these, ABA has a tendency to, I'm sure you've heard of ABA being somewhat controversial because of some of the techniques that people have used in the past that have been sort of harsh. And so it tends to have a negative connotation. And then you have a lot of people who are getting away from any kind of intervention. The problem being Autism is a neurological developmental condition, so it causes the brains to develop differently. So your brain is going to look different under a microscope when you have autism. It is a generally lifelong condition. Of course, we support and accept all of the individuals with autism at all levels. That said, autism poses when you have autism and when you're a young child and you have autism, that tendency poses a threat to young children of preventing them from acquiring necessary skills. That includes language, adaptive skills like toileting and feeding, social skills, any other type of behaviors that you want to train in a child. And we'll go into that in a little bit as to why. But autism is it's best if children with autism who are diagnosed early receive some level of early intervention to make sure that they develop skills. It's not about the person, it's not about tearing them down. It's about ensuring that they have the ability to live their lives independently as much as possible. Excuse me. And when do we require intervention? We say as soon as possible. Early intervention is always best. Wait and see is a lot of times what people have said in the past. I think I heard that with my son. Oh, well, let's just wait and see. And I was like, that's not what it says. At least I had enough concept to, to know at that point that I shouldn't just wait. But the longer you wait, if it's a significant issue, it can result in a catastrophic loss of skills. Early intervention can make the difference between level 1 and level 3 autism. And level 1 is what you want. Level 1 is when you have language. Essentially, level 1, what separates level 1 from level 2 and level 3 is substantial amounts of language and communication and the ability to interact with people, which is a really important skill that you don't realize that you need until you don't have it. So what do I do? And that's meaning you guys, not what do I do, but what do I do if I see a child? So when working with young children pre-diagnosis, be observant of potential early signs. So I wrote some of the things that you might see. You might see them not making eye contact. They seem to ignore you. They don't respond to their name. So you say Benjamin, and they just don't even look at you. They might focus on objects instead of people. They may have delayed speech or be really garbled and you can't understand them. There's a lack of shared attention. They may not use pointing or other communicative indicators to try to communicate with you because they're kind of in their own little world. And they do not initiate interactions. Now, some kids do some of these things, but not others. And so every child is different. So what you're looking at is kind of what you want to see is overall, are we seeing enough deficits to make it seem like this child might have a disability, So caretakers often notice signs even in late infancy. I know my son, before he was even 1, we were already diagnosing him with ADHD because that child would not sit still. He was all over the place all the time. We put him down and he was just off, and he wasn't making eye contact. And we thought, well, ADHD runs in the family, but we don't have any autism. But sure enough, that's what he ended up with. I wanted to bring up cultural issues because here in America, there's lots of things out there about autism. There's lots of stuff on the internet, on TV shows. Americans in general are increasingly aware and accepting of autism and are becoming more familiar with these signs. But people from some other cultures, or some Americans even, there are still people in the United States, may or may not share a stigma around a diagnosis. And we don't want to assume that someone from an East Asian country is going to have a stigma around it because they may not. But I have certainly seen this. It's documented in the literature, and I've certainly seen it plenty of times where I've had clients from India and Pakistan who can't tell their parents. They live here, but their parents are still back in their home countries. They can't tell their parents about the diagnosis because there's just a huge stigma around it. So it's almost like a secret. In some countries, parents cannot openly reveal they have a child with a disability without fear of being shunned. And then it may be upsetting to parents from any culture, including Americans, to hear of someone else's concern about their child. So let's say they're not seeing it, but you are, there may be, it may be upsetting, and I go into that a little bit. To kind of hear somebody else say, well, I feel like there might be something going on with your child. It's a tricky subject. So broaching the subject, if you suspect someone's child may have autism, first of all, be sensitive to the feelings of the parents, because if you're just going to hurt their feelings, you're probably not going to get very far, Since early intervention is best, it may be in the best interest of the child for you to speak up. Since this is such a sensitive issue for parents, it's best to use good judgment in broaching the subject. Some tips are ask questions instead of make comments. Like, for instance, you see a child and he's not making eye contact, maybe make a pointed question like, oh, does he frequently not look at you when you call his name? Just things like that where you're kind of asking a question instead of just telling them. Be very careful to be non-judgmental. Listen very carefully to what they have to say because they may already be noticing the signs. Um, you don't want to be judgmental, and I say that because as the mother of a child with autism and as someone who counsels parents of children with autism like every day, I hear so many stories, and I've had my own stories of people in the community seeing my son's behavior, seeing their children's behavior, and getting very angry about it, or else, shielding their one time. I have so many stories, but my son used to be a stripper, if that is something, if that's a good word for you. He used to strip his clothes in public because he just didn't like clothes. So he had some sensory issues. And that happened one time at a friend's birthday party. And this one woman was just shielding her girls' eyes. Now they were all like 3. So they were like 3-year-olds. But she was very, very upset and going, oh my goodness, and just was very distraught over the fact that a child would do that. And then of course the parent gets blamed. So of course I'm a terrible parent. And that's what you tend to hear. And that's what my parents tend to hear a lot. Is you're obviously just not good at this parenting thing. You don't know how to raise your child. And when you do that, you're building a wall and you're not going to get through to them. So you want to do it, you want to broach the subject as gently as you can. And place all the emphasis on the concern for the best interest of the child and the family. Make sure that they know that you care. I did post a link here to this POAC Autism Services. They have a little document that I found that I thought was a good one to kind of like give you a good guidance as to how to broach the subject if you need to. How to support parents for screening. So this is just, if the parent is like, you know what, maybe I do need to get him screened. This is kind of the order that you go in. So the pediatrician is the most salient place. That's changed quite a bit. Like I said, my son is 18, 15 years ago, 14, 13, whenever it was, I guess that would have been like 16 or 17 years ago when I first brought it up. My pediatrician just did not believe me. So that was kind of hard because I was the first one to notice that there was a difference. And she was like, oh no, he's fine. He just looked at me and he gave me a hug. And I was like, that's just not, it's frustrating because you see him all day long. The pediatrician sees him for 5 minutes and, they think, oh, he's fine. But she also, the thing is that people have they're becoming more and more knowledgeable. So over time, what I've seen is just a great shift in awareness, which is really helpful. So you probably more than likely, if you take your child to the pediatrician, they will be able to screen and help you, through that process. Also the school district. So if you don't have a pediatrician, you're somewhere rural, your school district also can do early intervention. They do screenings and they'll do like an initial basic, they don't even need a diagnosis. You can just go in there. And that's actually what we ended up doing with my son, was we went through the school district. This was in Georgia, not Texas. And let them know, and they were able to bring somebody out and we talked through it. And they gave us the information that we needed, I think they did an ADOS on him and decided that he needed intervention. So started him on intervention before he had an official diagnosis, which was nice. And then certain ABA facilities, I know here in the Fort Worth area, you can go to ABC, Action Behavior Centers, which is one of the ABA places around here, and they offer the ADOS. So that's the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. So that'll at least get you like a reasonable, conclusion that he probably does or doesn't have autism. And then you can, depending on what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to get, ABA coverage through your insurance company, they may or may not take that, or they may require that the ADOS be sent to a developmental pediatrician. So it really depends on the funding sources to, whether or not you actually need a full diagnosis. But you can also go online. Autism Speaks and the National Autism Association have screening tools, and there is one called the MChat, and you can Google that if you are at home right now and wanted to look at it. But it is an online screener that you can use to assess your own child or to assess a child that you spend time with. And it'll just give you an idea of are my concerns reasonable? supporting the child. So young children with autism often have challenging behaviors, and this is probably what you've seen, in the grocery store. I know it was certainly an issue for my child. Meltdowns, screaming, tantrums. They have sensory difficulties often, so they'll cover their ears, cover their eyes, aggression, hitting, pinching, kicking, biting. Self-injurious behavior, so head banging, hitting, punching self, biting self. Sometimes they do those things. Most of the kids, it's only a very small number that have severe behavior. It's kind of like, it follows the bell curve. So it's only a very small number of people, of the kids who actually have very severe behavior, but minor levels of all of these occur in most of the kids with autism that I work with. Elopement would be running away from the designated area, not going off and getting married in Vegas, non-compliance and refusal and flopping. So that's like you tell them what to do. You tell them, oh, come over here, and they just flop on the floor. And that means lie on the floor instead of doing what you say. Property destruction, so they might throw things, break stuff. Mouthing and pica, putting things in their mouth is mouthing. Actually ingesting the objects is pica. So those are all things that I deal with all the time with my kiddos with autism. Why do you have these behaviors? So challenging behaviors come about due to, and I put this really big, skills deficits. So that is what I want us to focus on when we think about the kids with autism. It's not the behaviors that they have came about because they function in some way productively for the child. The skills deficits in young children with autism occur because autism disrupts typical development. And I have some kind of information about typically developing versus atypically developing children. Typically developing children make eye contact with like even as infants, they'll look up, as within, a couple of weeks, they're looking at their parents and they watch their caretakers closely. And as they get older, they start mimicking their caretakers. And then they develop speech by imitating the sounds. And then they learn through increasingly complex play activities. And they develop social skills by interacting early and often with others while watching and imitating while making eye contact. So children with autism, that's disrupted. That interactive piece is disrupted. So they tend to not make eye contact. I've heard people with autism say that it's actually painful for them to make eye contact with people. So I cannot tell you why that is. I just know that this is the case. So they don't make eye contact when they're early, and the less they make eye contact and the less that they do these things, the more severe the skills deficits can be. So they may not watch their caretakers closely. They're limited in how much they can imitate. So how do we learn? We imitate. How do we learn to do anything that our parents show us to do? We imitate it. If our parents want to show us how to eat food or to sit on the potty and go potty, they show us and then we imitate them. But if the child is not watching and isn't making eye contact and it doesn't want to interact, then they're not imitating, and then they're not learning. And they may develop odd behavior patterns based on what they spend their time watching and doing instead. So if they're staring at, the ceiling fan, or if they're spinning a spinny toy and just staring at it and watching it, that's what they're spending their time doing, and that's how their brain is developing. So their behavior patterns are going to be atypical, and they tend to not develop social skills due to lack of meaningful social interactions. And I put more info, and there's just a little, a slide in there, not a slide, but that's a link to some more information about what development looks like. So what is ABA? So that's we've kind of come to what I actually do. ABA is it's applied behavior analysis. So it is the scientific study of behavior and what causes it and how to change it. And it started with it's got we did I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember the names of the people. I should know this by heart. B.F. Skinner, thank you. Skinner is one of, obviously, if you have any developmental or any kind of psychology background, you'll have heard of B.F. Skinner. He is the father of ABA, and he watched animals, actually. He did his initial research on animals, so mostly like rats and pigeons, and just watched to see, he would watch their behavior, and then he would try different things from at the beginning and at the end of their behaviors to try to manipulate their behaviors, to figure out what it is that changes, that causes new behaviors to develop. And then it gradually, through like the 1960s and 70s, that was applied to humans. And then we've kind of been learning more and more and meshing ourselves with developmental psychology so that we understand how to appropriately use behavioral learning techniques, on an individual who is a human who has who's in at a specific developmental stage to using, to ethically train behaviors. So a behavior is any observable action a person says or does. And let's see, did I skip anything? I think I kind of skipped around there. ABA tends to focus on two areas. So that's behavior reduction, which is for challenging and maladaptive behaviors like the ones I listed before, and then for skills acquisition. So that's helping them learn new skills to offset the maladaptive behaviors that have come about because of their lack of appropriate skills. Behavior reduction. So what behaviors should we reduce? Yes, reduce. We reduce all those negative behaviors. So aggression, self-injury, elopement, property destruction, and any other behavior that is potentially harmful or damaging. We do not attempt to reduce, at least most of us don't, self-stimulatory behaviors that do not interfere with learning. So that's like hand flapping, jumping up and down. You see rocking. Sometimes they'll like roll around on the floor. Just, there's like a million little behaviors that they kind of come up with. If they're not interfering with learning and they're helping the child self-regulate, then we allow them to happen. But if we may retrain, we don't retrain self-regulatory behaviors that may seem odd because if they're helping the child regulate, then they are functioning, they're a functional behavior. And behaviors other people find annoying, but they may be functional for the child. So we try not to target things like that. Behavior reduction, when a child has challenging behaviors, the first step is to observe the behavior carefully and take notes about what occurs before, during, and after the behavior. And we call that ABC data. You may have heard of that. Antecedent, behavior, and consequence. I have a visual source. This visual source came from that link right there. I believe I have a. Do I? Maybe not. I think I have one in there somewhere. So we look at what happens before the behavior. Right. Oh, there it is. Okay. Skip ahead. An ABC example. So little Johnny sees a cookie jar on top of the fridge. He climbs the counter and gets the cookies, and then he eats a cookie. So the behavior that we don't want is him climbing on the counter, right? What happened before he sees the cookie jar on top of the fridge, and what happened after he got to eat a cookie? When we observe the antecedents and consequences, they help us formulate a theory about what is initially triggering the behavior and what is maintaining the behavior. And what happens before the behavior, if it happens frequently, may be triggering each instance of behavior. And then what happens after is what we watch to see what is maintaining it or causing it to continue to occur. So in this instance, seeing the cookie jar is what triggered the behavior in the first place because he sees the cookie jar, he thinks cookies, yum. And the behavior, of course, is the dangerous behavior of climbing on the counter because he could fall. And then getting to eat the cookie is what maintains the behavior or causes it to be more likely to occur in the future. This all seems very simple, but it gets more complex with more difficult behaviors. ABA classifies behaviors according to their function. That is, according to what they do for the individual. So every behavior that an individual emits, they do so for some purpose. And we have 4 categories of purposes or functions for behavior that we look at, that we base our treatment on. So we have to first determine what the function of the behavior is. It's either automatic sensory, so something feels good inside of the person, or attention, or escape, or access to a tangible item. And behaviors can serve more than one function, most of them do. ABC data collection helps us determine which category behavior falls into. So some examples under automatic sensory, any behavior that an individual emits that simply feels good somehow, it appeals to at least one of the senses. That includes self-stimulatory behaviors like hand flapping and rocking, and food and drink, like eating, drinking, but those things feel good when you do them. So frequently eating and drinking food is automatically reinforced. Attention is any behavior that an individual emits to gain another person's attention. So that's what it can be positive or negative attention. So sometimes I have a child right now actually who she comes over and sometimes she'll bite. and she will bite to get your attention because she wants you to look at her. So unfortunately, that's it's one of those behaviors that we have to treat very seriously. Um, but even though she knows you're going to be looking at her with a negative feel, like an angry feel, it doesn't bother her. She just likes the attention. Escape, any behavior that an individual emits to either avoid or get out of a task. So you're avoiding it by not even starting the task, or you're getting out of a task that you've already started. So swerving to avoid a crash would be an escape maintained adult behavior, a perfectly acceptable one. Elopement from a room, if a child is expected to eat food he finds aversive, is an escape maintained behavior that a child with autism might have. He runs, and why did he run? Because he doesn't want to eat the food that you just gave him. That's escape. Access to tangible items is another one. That's the fourth one. So any behavior an individual emits to gain a physical item. A child may scream for the purpose of getting an adult to hand him a toy. So the child screams really loudly, and the adult is like, oh, he's screaming, I should give him the toy. And so the child has learned, if I scream, I will get a toy. So ABC data collection helps us determine which category behavior falls into. This is a lot of information. I didn't want to do too deep of a dive into ABA, but behavior reduction, we have strategies, and pretty much every time that we have a child with behaviors, we have to come up with a behavior plan that's based on the information that I just gave you. So the ABC data collection, the function of the behavior, and then once we determine the function, we use tools that are in our tool belt to create a specific behavior plan for the child. So we use reinforcement and punishment. Usually we just focus on reinforcement. Punishment is a last resort, and that is because I'm sorry, let me go ahead and define. Reinforcement is any time that you either add or subtract anything to or from an environment that makes the behavior more likely to occur in the future. So you can have positive reinforcement, which is me giving you a candy because you went pee in the potty. That's positive. I added something to the environment and you're more likely to go to the bathroom in the future. So I'm increasing the frequency of the behavior. Negative reinforcement is removing something aversive from the environment to increase the future frequency of the behavior. So that would be you sit in the car and you don't put on your seatbelt, and then your seatbelt little beep 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 starts beeping, beep beep beep. And you think, oh my gosh, I can't stand that sound. So you grab your seatbelt and you plug it in, and then the sound stops. So you just emitted the behavior of putting your seatbelt on, and it was negatively reinforced by the removal of an aversive stimulus. And then we've got positive punishment and positive reinforcement, which are essentially the same idea. So positive punishment would be something like spanking, which is obviously not something that we do, but it is an example. You added something to the environment that is intended to decrease the future likelihood of the behavior. And negative punishment is intended to decrease, but it would be removing something fun. So something that they like. So like we call it like a response cost. So if they have a toy and you're trying to punish them, you take away their toy. That's negative punishment. So those are all strategies that we can use. We primarily focus on reinforcement because all of the evidence suggests that it is the best way to increase behaviors. We also have extinction, which is the removal of whatever it is that's reinforcing the behavior. So in our example earlier, we had a child who was stealing a cookie out of a cookie jar. Extinguishing that, so we could reinforce that behavior by giving them even more cookies. So if we wanted them to continue to climb on the counter and do it more often, maybe we could give them praise and some more cookies. We would give them reinforcement. If we wanted them to stop by using punishment, we would leave the cookie jar as it is, but we would do something like, okay, go to your room, or spanking or something like that. That would be a punishment procedure. Extinction is when we remove whatever is reinforcing behavior. So in an extinction procedure, we would remove the cookie jar. So a child wants to climb on the counter, but there's no cookies out there, so they're not going to climb on the counter anymore. They have no reason to. That's extinction. Differential reinforcement is a combination of extinction and reinforcement. So it's removing access to whatever it is, or whatever the behavior is maintained by, and reinforcing the behavior at the same time. And those are complicated, and I know it's a lot of information. Those are things that you can look up and read about. Happy to explain a little bit more. Behavior reduction strategies, behavior plans are individualized to the child, but I wanted to give you some idea of things that we would do. That every child is different and every behavior is going to look a little bit different. But for automatic sensory behaviors, a lot of times we have to replace the sensory behavior. So if the child is putting things in their mouth a lot, we'll give them a like jewelry, if you've heard of that. We'll give them like a chewy necklace that they're allowed to chew on. Attention maintained, we would ensure that the child is receiving plenty of positive attention for appropriate behavior, and we would reduce or eliminate attention for unwanted behavior. So that's differential reinforcement. And that's what I'm kind of trying to show you is that we have specific behavior protocols that we follow for these kiddos. Based on the tools that we have, to give you a general idea is a little bit hard because every child is different and it's really got to be based on the function of the behavior. But this is at least giving you like some sort of like global view of what this looks like. For an escape maintain behavior, we would ensure that the task is reasonable. So if the child is trying to escape something that they don't want, like maybe you told them put on your shoes and they don't want to, we make sure that the task is reasonable. So if they shouldn't have to put on their shoes because you're inside and there's no reason, then we could say, okay, then, you can say no and we won't. But if they're having to go outside and it's negative 32 degrees outside, they need shoes on. So you have to put on your shoes. So then we would use desensitization tactics and skills acquisition to gradually get them okay with wearing shoes. And then access to tangible items. We would ensure that the item is acceptable and give the child the means to request it. So that would be functional communication training. And then we would desensitize the child to denied access. So when they're denied access to a child, I throw around these terms. I talk about them all the time, and I'm so sorry. I know that they're not words that you guys are typically used to hearing, but just trying to explain them a little bit more. There's a lot to learn here. But if this gives you some idea, we have very specific protocols that we have to follow in order to make sure that the kiddos, that the negative behaviors decrease. And then skills acquisition. So this is the other portion of ABA. Half is behavior intervention or behavior reduction, and then the other half is skills acquisition. So we're wanting to make sure that the kids have the skills that they need, and build them so that they can live independent lives, basically. Most behaviors come about due to a skills deficit. ABA uses specific assessments based on the skills. Typically, developing child would have to decide what behaviors to teach. It's a run-on sentence. We have specific assessments that we use. One of them is VB-MAP. Another one is Early Start Denver model. And then we also have the ABLES. There's several assessments that we use to help us understand based off of like their norm reference. So based off the typical developing child, what skills deficits this child with autism has right now. And then we use what we know about learning theory to teach them those skills. The most universal skill deficit requiring intervention for children with ASD is functional communication. I put that in big letters because it's so critically important. So many of our behaviors come about because we want something and we don't know how to ask for it. This refers to the ability to make one's wants and needs known. And frequently, ABA practitioners like me collaborate with speech language pathologists to make an appropriate plan for individual children based on their specific language deficit. So SLPs kind of have the market cornered on true language development. ABA has our verbal operants, which is a whole other that's another way to look at how language develops. So we kind of have to work together to make sure that we can use behavioral strategies to help the children learn language that they need to learn. More skills that we frequently target are adaptive skills, toileting, eating independently, dressing self. ASD often co-occurs with low muscle tone. This is a thing that I see quite frequently. It's probably part of that neurological difference. It's probably just part of the way that the brain is structured. For some reason, I just see it a lot. Kids will come in and they have a hard time like using their hands to write. So a lot of my kiddos will come in and they don't want to use a pencil to write. It really bothers them. And they'll have huge behaviors over it. I don't want to write with a pencil. And it's because it actually physically hurts their hands because they just don't have the muscle tone. So they require occupational or physical therapy to address muscle needs. Social skills, so verbal and nonverbal interactions with peers and adults, social and emotional targets like identifying emotions. There's a huge curricula based on SEL. And self-regulation, and that's a really critical piece for people with autism. They need to learn how to manage their own emotions. Frequently, that's a really, really hard thing for them to do. So more skills we frequently target are language goals. That's vocal language, making requests, vocal meaning with your voice. Sometimes our kids don't develop the ability to use their words with their mouth. So in that instance, we switched to AAC, and that's augmentative alternative communication. You've probably seen some, if you've worked with kids with autism, you've probably seen them come in with like an iPad with like a Proloquo, it's a talker. We call it a talker, an AAC device. AAC really just means any kind of visual system that you can help them use to communicate. But we usually, when I say AAC, more often than not, I'm referring to an iPad with a specific app on it that helps them find words and say words in order to make sentences. And then behavioral support goals, the use of visuals, the use of reinforcement systems, and direct programs to target behavioral difficulties. Developmental psychology and play, and this is really critically important, especially for the early childhood. So the best ABA therapy is paired with developmental psychology because we need to understand how behavior comes about, but we also need to understand what behaviors a child should have at any given time. So developmental psychology informs learning theory with the stages of a child's development to help support holistic child development and growth. And in early childhood, most learning occurs during play. Early intervention ABA should be embedded in play-based routines, and they help expand language, expand play, and support social skills. And a lot of that's based in that joint attending. So the triadic gaze that I was talking about, you looking at the child and then looking at the object, and then taking turns looking back and forth, making lots of eye contact. And then as they start to do that, they start actually imitating you, and then they start playing with toys. And the playing with toys frequently co-occurs with more language. It's an interesting process to watch, and it's something that you would have never thought of, had you not known this child with autism. Like, you don't realize what order people, kids learn to play, learn to speak. So I have, how can a caretaker help parents? There are lots of, advice columns out there. It's kind of a little bit tricky. The more you understand, the more empathetic and helpful you can be. So informing yourself about autism and what it looks like and all the strategies and therapies and everything that parents have to go through is one of the best things that you can do. Consider continuing education on early childhood play-based techniques if you are, somebody who works with small children. Be supportive, non-judgmental, ask, don't tell. So ask them to tell you about, what their experience has been like, and then listen carefully. Consider the emotional impact on a parent of having a child with special needs and just listen. It's a very frequent comment, as the mother of a small child with autism, well, he's 18 now, but when he was small, I have been through all of this. So whenever I speak with my parents, I certainly can relate, but it's every single parent. They all have stories about just how hard it is to feel like the pariah, to feel like the one that's left out, because they don't know what to do, and they're trying so hard to help this child, and the child just has very significant disability. Be positive and supportive of every success. So even if it's a small one, oh my gosh, yes, he's 3 and he just peed in the potty for the first time, and yes, your 1-year-old was potty trained 6 months ago or whatever, but still be positive, be supportive, because it's amazing when a 3-year-old with autism is being in the potty, help parents practice self-care. A lot of times they have a really hard time. A lot of marriages fail but in the presence of a child with a disability. That's a really common statistic that you hear. I've certainly seen it happen. And when parents can care for themselves and take the breaks that they need to be mentally healthy, they're going to be much better for their own children. So whatever you can do to support parents in their self-care. And then being willing to follow behavior plans. So obviously, like I said, I can't give you specifics about any individual child, but I can give you a general concept of how behavior plans are created. And we can certainly, you or someone can talk about, what specifically any individual child needs. But if you're willing to follow the behavior plans that are given to you by like the LSSP or the BCBA, you're going to be more likely to be able to be successful, help them be successful. And then I've just got some ideas there. Those are just ways to help caregivers. Those are just links that you can look at. And then I put this up here. This is the end of this part of the presentation. I just wanted to put this up here. I actually just stuck it in there after I sent it to you, Maria, because I've remembered that I have this little resource. This is just navigatelifetexas.org. It's just a website that's out there, but our facility here tends to give this to parents because it's got lots of good resources on it. So if you keep that and just have it handy and just give it to parents, they can find all kinds of information about all kinds of stuff. So. Right. So yeah, if there's anything, that's the end of this part of the presentation. Do we have any questions? I know it's 1:50. I took a really long time. Sorry, guys.
No worries, Karen. I think this was what it needed to be. I know this is a topic that most participants have highly requested. So thank you so much for sharing all that great information. I do see a question in the chat by one of our participants. What programs are there for nonverbal students that can use an iPad? Are you familiar with any?
Mhm. Well, so most of the programs that I would know would be in the public school system. I used to teach those. So in the public school system, your your comm classes, or we called it Stack and Keller. You know, it's the self-contained class for children with autism. Will frequently have some of them actually will give out iPads. Some of those districts will hand out an iPad to a child who has autism and has the need for it. Um, but yeah, those types of things, specifically programs like that, I mean, they're required to anyway. But you'll have a specialist, usually in a SLP, at least one or two in the district, who will be able to kind of assist and help the child navigate. A lot of us, you know, I taught those classes. I've known a lot of people, like other people who've taught those classes, and in the public school system, you will have people who should be trained on that, who can help you. Outside of that, I think it's a little bit trickier in terms of navigating private schools and such. That's an issue for kind of explaining to you why I'm getting an MBA, because I feel like outside of the public sector, the private sector has a tendency to not have the same levels of supports that some of the other people have. So that the public school system has, and it just has to do with funding and, required by law. There's several reasons, but I personally would love to open something like that is supportive of kids who have no choice but to use an AAC device because they don't have a vocal verbal speech. So if that answers the question.
Miss Abbott, if I may, I asked the question. I'm an early child care provider, and I have several students that they do attend school in a pre-K program, but they are here. And I've parents have given me permission. I've called the school to see what they are doing with the student at school. So when the child is here, that we can continue. Because for those students, with all students, consistency is so good. So I purchased 3 iPads, but I don't know what program, still waiting to hear back from the schools. I've called several times. I'm in the Spring ISD district. So it's,
Gotcha.
and I've even gone to the school, had to sit and wait, but it's kind of foreign to the school because I am an early child care provider. So they're looking at me like, why are you doing this? Because it's not heard of for an early child care provider to, I guess, take that interest. But these are students and they're very gifted. They do learn because I do hear, even though they are nonverbal, I would hear them when they're playing with different manipulatives, they're singing songs. So I know they're learning something in school, but I want to do more. So that's why I asked the question.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's great for you. Do they typically, when I see a child receive an AAC device, almost universally it's through their SLP? Because the SLP that's a speech language pathologist. and they usually are children who have a diagnosis with autism. I do have a couple parents who have purchased one for their child just because they liked it. I can give you a couple of names of programs, but in order to get it funded, because it can be kind of expensive, I mean, you can download Proloquo. It's just an app on it's called Proloquo. I can even write it in the little chat if you'd like. That's one option. Where's the chat? Okay, so Proloquo is one. And then you've got TD Snap, but that's also extremely expensive. It's actually something you can download, but you have to pay like a lot of them have like a monthly fee, or you can purchase it. I think Proloco had a one time. I'm not sure. You'll have to look. But those are things that you can actually download onto an iPad. And there's also LAMP. Those are the three that I'm primarily familiar with. And I know Proloco is on an iPad. I'm on my phone. You can't always, I don't have an iPad in the office with me. Um, but those are things that you can download. However, typically, if you wanted to get it covered by the child's insurance or through like an alternate funding source, which they do exist, you would want to go through an SLP, like a speech therapist. Do you have access to a speech therapist?
I don't, but in early childcare, because you have students with disabilities or what have you, they give funding, they give like incentives. So I want to make sure when it like with those funds, I want to be
Mhm.
intentional, not just buying something, so I can use those funds to purchase for those students.
That sounds great. I love that you're doing is learning just because you have to kind of play with it a little bit to figure out where all the words are. Proloco is a lot more what am I saying? Like you can change where the words go and everything. Lamp tends to stick them in one place and leave them. And that has to do with motor planning. That's what the MP is for, motor planning and lamp. Um, it's for they one of the things that speech, and of course I'm not an SLP, but one of the things that a speech therapist will tell you is that it's best for them to be able to memorize the motor movement instead of having to look and see where things are. It's kind of this because it just takes more time to actually like focus and try to find things visually than it does to just do this. It's kind of like the same thing if you try to type in your log into your computer. If you have to actually sit there and stare at the letters and remember what it is, it takes you longer than if you just have it memorized. So they try to keep the words in one place on LAMP. And Proloquo, I mean, I think they try that as well, but it's not set up the same way. But anyway, there's pros and cons to all of them. Proloquo is a great resource though. It is kind of expensive. I think it costs $300 or something like that to download. It is half off in October and April, FYI. Proloquo is. However, it is currently December, so that's not very helpful. But yeah, hopefully that's at least partly helpful. I would say if you have an SLP, I'm trying to think who I could send you to in terms of resources. Let me see if I can maybe like send that in to them and they can send it out to you guys. Does that work? I'm gonna write down like how to get AAC info to people who don't have access to an AAC, to like an SLP.
Yeah, Karen, go ahead
Okay.
and you can share that with me, and then we'll make sure to distribute that to all participants that joined today's call. Tim,
Sounds good. I'll have to ask some people. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was gonna say, Tim, you mentioned something on the chat. Is this something you want to say a lot to the Learning Network?
So one of the things we did a couple of years ago is created a release of information form that we have the parents sign and then take to the school where the child is located. And then that way we're able to communicate directly with the teachers. We also sometimes will have the parents ask to bring us to the IEP, so we're actually sitting in on the conversation to talk about what's happening at the center, and kind of working with the parents as an advocate along with what's happening at the school. So if centers haven't done that before, that's one thing that has worked out really well for us with some of our kids with special needs.
Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions or comments for Karen? I do see a few
I had
suggestions
one
from
question.
Joyce. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, this is Sandra in Dripping Springs. I was inquiring if she could email us the QR code sheet so that we could just copy that and add that to our resource book. That would be very helpful for us.
Yes, we'll be sharing the presentation with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, for everything that you've been sharing in the chat as well. I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Cox for a quick summary of all the wonderful discussion we had today.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Karen, for your presentation. So just to kind of sum up what has been covered, and we really appreciate all the questions you've asked too, because if you have a question, someone else can probably benefit from your response. But of course, Karen shared some diagnostic information that we know autism is related to social communication, restrictive repetitive behavior, and you can see those characteristics in early childhood, and they cause significant impairments. And she went on to talk about, we don't know exactly what causes autism. We know it's several different things related that seem to be factors that play together to that. We know early intervention is so important. That's when the brain is developing at the fastest rate. So if we can get in there and help teach those skills, then we can help the child work towards the greatest level of independence that they can achieve. And so then, of course, she talked a little bit about ABA, applied behavior analysis. And really, if you have a student who is working with the BCBA, their focus is to really observe behaviors. Hopefully, all of us are doing that, trying to understand what might be prompting those behaviors. And then a behavior analyst would help develop a plan that would look very different from every student. Some of you may have heard the saying, if you've met one individual with autism, right, you have met one individual with autism.
Apologies, Dr. Cox. It looks like you got muted.
There we go. Okay. I'm not sure where it cut off. But I was saying that just as all of us are unique, an autism diagnosis does not mean that the same thing would work for you as someone else with the same diagnosis, that there are those unique characteristics. But the goal is to reduce those behaviors that interfere with learning, that may create challenges related to safety, and to increase the skills, especially around communication, being able to communicate wants and needs, around self-regulation, around safety, and independence.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cox, for that. I do see a few questions on the chat. We'll go ahead and save them and send them out to our hub team for additional guidance via email. We do appreciate everyone that has joined today's session. We don't want to keep you any longer than we have. I know we're 2 minutes past. But again, thank you everyone for joining today's session. The TechPets link will be emailed out to everyone along with the resources shared for today. We do encourage everyone to please complete the post-session survey as well to let us know your thoughts on the sessions and allow us to plan out future and upcoming sessions. We do ask you to return with us on January 9th for a presentation on the Help Me Grow program by the Texas Department of State Health Services. With that, we do look forward to seeing everyone next year. Happy holidays and wishing you all the best. Thank you.